I'm Ep1Pa1, and I started as a photographer, snapping events like this. An evening of boxing in London's East End. I made my name when my photographs began to appear in the Observer newspaper, capturing the sheer drama of sport, the heroism, sadly also the tragedy. I continued working in newspapers, becoming picture editor of The Guardian, developing an eye for the one great image that captures the whole story, and became aware of how the camera, all-seeing and all-knowing, can freeze in time our lives and the historic moments that have shaped them. It's an amazing photograph. We're right in the middle of the action. So when offered, I jumped at the chance to tell the remarkable history of British photography, to travel from the surprise of the very first picture taking. Can you make me look 20 years younger?
I'll have a go.
To the mysteries of today's digital age. Tell an old Luddite like me, what is Instagram? To find out about photographers past and present and the unforgettable pictures they took. Understand the science that made their art possible and the changing ways we have consumed the photograph over the 182 years since its invention. In this first of 3 programs, I'm going back to the beginning, back to the 19th century and the rapid rise of the photograph in British life. Back to the first sense of wonder and what the Victorians called the natural magic of photography.
It's very, very quick. I mean, it is Victorian Polaroid.
Victorian Polaroid, great phrase. In the summer of 1835, landed gentleman and polymath Henry Fox Talbot was seen purposefully walking in and around his country house here at Laycock Abbey in Wiltshire. He was carrying with him a small wooden box, trying to decide where to place the object. What was Fox Talbot up to with his curious behaviour? Well, he was inventing British photography. And this is a mysterious device. It's actually a replica of Talbot's first camera, fitted with a lens from one of his own microscopes, and with this he was to attempt to take Britain's first ever photographs. With one image, taken in front of this window in the Abbey's South Gallery, Fox Talbot laid the foundations for British photography. Inside, curator at Laycock, Roger Watson, explained to me how.
There was a fireplace across from the window. He set the camera on the mantelpiece. I think that he set them around the house. That's why his wife referred to them as mousetraps.
Ah, right.
Because she kept seeing these little boxes all over the house.
And what was inside this tiny box?
It was very simple. It was a piece of writing paper that had been coated first with a salt solution and then coated with silver nitrate, and the two mixed together to create silver chloride, which is sensitive to light, and that's all you need.
Can you show me exactly what came out of this tiny camera?
It's a little disappointing when you first see it because it's so tiny. I've got it in my pocket here. This is a reproduction of the world's first negative.
So small.
Absolutely. This little ghost of an image here is a negative that you could make positive prints from. And it was the cornerstone. Really, up until the digital age, we still made negatives from which we made positive images. The detail is astounding. I mean, people like to go in and look at this with a magnifying glass, and you can actually count the number of panes in the window that we're standing in front of.
And how long, once he coated it, how long would he have had to take the picture?
For a long time, we thought it was about 15 minutes, but we've experimented here, and it looks like it was closer to 2 hours, probably.
Incredible.
The sensitivity of the paper was really slow. It just took a long time for the light to act on it.
For a number of years, Fox Talbot had nurtured an ambition to permanently capture images, motivated by his shortcomings as an amateur artist. He frankly admitted his sketches were melancholy to behold. Fox Talbot could see the beauty in nature, but was frustrated by his own failure to replicate what he saw with his own eyes. He speculated.
How charming it would be if it were possible to cause these natural images to imprint themselves durably and remain fixed upon the paper.
The 19th century was the era of the gentleman scientists like Fox Talbot. He was part of a network of enthusiasts aware of the latest developments in chemistry and optics, so could turn to these to find a solution to his artistic dilemma. But shy and retiring by nature, Fox Talbot was slow in coming forward about his experiments, until at the beginning of 1839 there came unsettling news of competition from across the Channel in France.
There was a man named Louis-Jacques Mandé de Guerre in Paris who was experimenting with the idea of photography at the same time. And on the 7th of January 1839, it was published in the Paris press that he had created a photographic process and that the images were little miracles in and of themselves. Talbot, meanwhile, he hadn't really made an image since 1836, and he was probably sitting down to breakfast sometime about January 12th when he read the newspaper that the news had come through.
Fox Talbot was now forced to go public. Barely 3 weeks after the announcement in Paris, a paper by him was read to the Royal Society.
Some account of the art of photogenic drawing, or the process of which natural objects may be made to delineate themselves without the aid of the artist's pencil, a method which I had devised some time previously.
In the grounds at Laycock, photographer Richard Synan-Jones showed me what practical steps Fox Talbot then took to improve on his process. Here, Richard has taken an image of the Abbey using a replica of the bigger camera that Fox Talbot had ordered, equipped with better lenses. No f-stops on the lens.
Thanks for reminding me. There we go. F44.
So that drops the exposure time down, does it?
It does. It
Yeah.
stops the light coming through, but
yeah.
makes it much sharper as well.
The larger format camera also allowed for a much larger final image than Talbot's first photographs. So what is this now, essentially? This is a negative?
It's a piece of ordinary paper treated with light-sensitive chemicals. It's sandwiched between two sheets of glass to keep it moist.
Yeah.
Basically a light-sealed cassette with a kind of slide at the front there that exposes the plate to the inside of the camera.
So you focused up already, you've done your aperture,
Lens caps on, aperture's in.
you've got a good idea of exposure time.
Yeah, 20 minutes.
Because of improvements to the chemical coating of the negative, exposure time shortened from hours to minutes. Here Richard exposed the photographic plate for 20 minutes, and here is the result. And I think what Richard has produced is truly magical. In 1841, Fox Talbot patented the whole process, calling it the calotype, ancient Greek for beautiful picture. In the courtyard, he took photographs that showed a grasp of composition and framing. For example, the ladder. And this homage to Dutch painting, the open door, with its atmospheric use of light and shadow. And now there was a word for capturing images with a camera, first used by astronomer Sir John Herschel. Herschel called it photography, Greek for light drawing. Beyond Laycock, others took up the calotype process. In Scotland, painter David Octavius Hill and chemist Robert Adamson used it to produce portraits rather than images of buildings and nature. Like these wonderful photographs of New Haven fishermen who appear so confident in front of the camera. But Fox Talbot's technique had its limitations. It was unpredictable, with the positive prints from his negatives often muddy or grainy. One artist, struggling to make a living, was disappointed by the colotype. Butcher's son, Frederick Scott Archer, was a sculptor who wanted to make a record of his work to help it sell. In a former Manchester cotton mill, photographer John Brewer demonstrated how Archer also used recent advances in chemistry to develop his own photographic process. Revealed in 1851, this was wet plate photography.
Well, first of all, you need to cut the glass, and then it has to be immaculately clean.
Instead of flimsy paper, Archer used the more solid medium of glass to make the negative plate. So you're coating this glass all over?
That's right.
So it literally is a wet plate?
It is, and if it dries out, you wouldn't be able to develop it.
So everything has to be done quite quickly from now on?
It does.
We can't mess about. Archer introduced a newly discovered chemical solution being used in medical dressings, collodion. So what's in now? What's this box has just gone into?
That's silver nitrate. So the silver nitrate is mixing with some of the chemicals in collodion to make it light sensitive.
Because the plate is so light sensitive, this first stage of the process ends in the dark. The next stage takes place on the studio floor where I have my photograph taken. The prepared wet plate is exposed to record an image of my ugly mug.
Okay, so I'm just checking the focus onto the eyes.
How long do you have to take my picture?
Really, just a couple of minutes.
Wow.
So we need to work really fast. So I'm going for an exposure here of 20 seconds.
So I'll shut up now and not move, right?
Now you can breathe.
I can breathe. Oh,
and you
good.
can blink.
Oh, right.
Okay. So we use a top hat as a shutter.
I love your shutter covers. Brilliant.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Wet plate photography greatly speeded up exposure times. Within a decade, we'd gone from 20 minutes needed by Richard at Laycock to the 20 seconds it's taken John here. Well, that's painless. The last stage, back in the dark, is where the image finally appears. We've taken the photograph, we beetled it back to the darkroom. What is that you're pouring on
That's
now?
developer.
Right. It's that moment of nervousness and anticipation I remember from my own darkroom days. That waiting for the photographic image magically to appear.
Okay, we put the light on.
Wow, look at that.
So that's how fast it is.
Wow.
It is Victorian Polaroid.
Victorian Polaroid, great phrase. Wow, look at the quality of that. That's superb. Shame about the bloke in it, but it's a superb neg. From this one negative, you could print as many positive copies as you liked. A mass production of images so appropriate for a Britain experiencing industrial revolution. But sadly, no profit ever came to Frederick Scott Archer. Unlike Fox Talbot, this pioneer of British photography didn't have the money to take out a patent on his own invention. He died at the age of 43, penniless. Yet Archer had refined the scientific basis on which the new medium could go out into the world and create art. One of the first to realise photography's unprecedented fusion of art and science, came here during the summer of 1854 to Bolton Abbey in Yorkshire and the surrounding Wharfe Valley. Roger Fenton was a founder member of the Photographic Society, dedicated to raising technical standards, but also to making photography into a fine art. Fenton was trained as a painter and wanted to prove that a mechanical device of the camera could find new ways to reinterpret established genres of art. In this instance, that of landscape. He took a photograph of the Abbey ruins. When this was exhibited, Victorians, conscious of the turbulent times they were living through, would read it as a vision of time past, haunting and romantic, yet also comforting. Then from the shore of the wharf, downriver from the Abbey, Fenton took this. Contemporaries understood the quality of his vision. He seems to be to photography what Turner was to painting, wrote one critic. The Illustrated London News praised his soft and mellow tone and richness of atmospheric colour. Contemporaries understood the quality of his vision. He seems to be to photography what Turner was to painting, wrote one critic. The Illustrated London News praised his soft and mellow tone and richness of atmospheric colour. It's all the more impressive when you consider that Fenton and his assistant had to take not only a heavy camera, tripod and glass plates, but also processing materials along the river. The drawback with wet plate photography was that Fenton had no choice but to develop his negatives on the spot, using a portable darkroom. Any delay with the wet plate drying spelt disaster. So it's a real challenge to take a photograph here, on the slippery rocks where the river narrows into a torrent of roaring water. Yet he made a masterpiece, evoking the sublime and the sheer force of nature. On the very spot this was taken, I talked to photo historian Colin Harding. Now, I was always told never to shoot into bright light. When he did it so up here, do you think he knew what he was doing?
I think he did. The idea was that you use light behind you, but Fenton was prepared to push the boundaries. And if he pointed his lens towards the light, he would create this dramatic atmospheric effect where the sky seems to merge into the water, creating this almost a slice between the two banks, reinforcing this sense of the narrow gorge. So you get this wonderful effect of the movement of the water captured over the long exposure, framed by the figures of the fishermen immobile on the banks of the river.
Does this photograph taken here bring something new to what people would have expected?
The tradition of the figure in landscape, the romantic paintings, German romanticism of the 19th century, he knew all of that. But what he was able to do was to use photography, to use the framing of composition to create something which is different. Taking the old traditions but extending them to create new effects. So taking the effects that Turner created with paint but using light to create those effects. So not abandoning tradition, but incorporating tradition and building on it to create something new, a particular photographic aesthetic.
I can now understand how a photograph like this from the Wharfe Valley is a poetic, almost timeless vision. But the camera could also capture the here and now, the news, those truly momentous events making Britain the most powerful nation in the world. At Napier Yard in the Isle of Dogs, in London's Docklands, photographer Robert Howlett did exactly this. Howlett had helped set up a business to make money out of picture taking, with premises on Bond Street. In 1857, he was hired to photograph the most ambitious project so far from the greatest engineer of the time, Isambard Kingdom Brunel. Brunel, wanted his creation of the Great Eastern Steamship to be recorded, celebrated and immortalised, not by any old media, but by the power of photography. Howlett photographed this site many times to chronicle the building of what was claimed to be the largest movable object ever to sail on the high seas. And he rose to the challenge of conveying the massive scale of his subjects. His photographs showing a ship 692 feet long and weighing 18,000 tons. With 6 masts and 5 steam engines generating 8,000 units of mechanical horsepower. This was being built to carry up to 4,000 passengers across the oceans of the world. I think Howlett showed great skill in his choice of angles to capture the grandeur of the ship. But he showed great courage too. To get this bird's eye view of the ship, Howlett had to haul his camera and his tripod high up onto the wooden scaffolding. Quite a feat. Each stage of the construction was eagerly reported on by the press. With newspapers growing and a circulation war underway, the photograph was in demand. Now it would be seen by greater numbers than ever before. Howlett's work was bought by the Illustrated Times and included in a special edition. Each photograph had to be copied by an engraver who made a woodblock version of the image. Until later printing techniques, this was the only way a photograph could appear in a newspaper. Howlett's role was not only one of an observer, but also a reporter, especially when Brunel's great project started to go wrong. He was present to record the ship's difficult, drawn-out, sideways launch into the Thames. At the first attempt on the 3rd of November 1857, the monstrous structure was renamed Leviathan. But it moved barely 3 feet. There was a second, then a third failure to float. During this troubled period, Brunel's portrait was taken by Howlett in front of the ship's launching chains. This has become the iconic image of Victorian power and glory. But for Howlett's biographer, Rose Teamby, there is much more to learn about it. If you understand the context, does it help you understand the photograph?
Absolutely. It's a man struggling against the odds, vilified by the general public and under enormous stress, but defiant in the face of that stress.
And there's a certain swagger in the picture, isn't there, with the cigar and the jauntiness of it? I
don't agree.
No?
No. He always smoked a cigar. He smoked 40 cigars a day. He always wore a stovepipe hat. So all this was a portrait of the real Brunel. It was the Brunel that you would see on site every day. The trousers show a dockyard worker, and that didn't bother him at all. He was not a vain man, and Howlett caught all of it.
Why is this photograph so different?
Well, quite simply, it's an absolutely fantastic example of breaking the rules, having your conventional classical portrait reinterpreted by photography. Your country gentleman in his grand estate, it's a muddy shipyard in Millwall, and his thoroughbred horse is now a wall of chain and his giant ship. It was revolutionary in its own way, mirroring how revolutionary the ship was.
In the end, Brunel got fourth time lucky with the launch of his great sea monster. The Leviathan made its maiden voyage on the 30th of August 1859. But by this time Brunel was dead, and so was Howlett, another photographic trailblazer at 27, dying young. The Great Eastern photographs, taken together, are a record of Britain as a mighty industrial nation. But photography could also be a witness to Britain as an imperial power, especially when it went to war. In the Royal Collection at Windsor Castle, there are original prints of photographs Roger Fenton took in 1855 of the conflict between Britain and Russia in the Crimea. Head of photographs, Sophie Gordon, shows me the first images ever commissioned of a war zone.
This photograph shows Roger Fenton's mobile photographic van. The man sitting on the van is Fenton's assistant, Marcus Sparling, and it's essentially a mobile darkroom. He also needed a way of telling the other soldiers, the other people out there, who he was and what he was doing, because this was a really unusual sight at this time. No one was used to seeing a photographer taking photographs on a battlefield.
This portrait of Fenton is revealing of a man who wrote in letters home had dust and heat spoilt many photographs, about the flies and the awful commotion, how he was often bad with the cholera, how under fire he was covered in brains and blood from a poor fellow standing nearby. So it is remarkable that out of 700 glass plates Fenton took to the Crimea, over half came out. Many of these penetrating portraits of soldiers of all ranks.
I think if you look closely at Fenton's portraits, you get a sense that he is trying to depict some of the horrors that the soldiers have seen on the battlefield. And some of them are almost psychological portraits. You get a sense of the horrors that the men have witnessed. They almost seem to be affected by shell shock. So in this particular photograph of de Lacy Evans, who's one of the leading commanders in the Crimea, you really see a very haggard expression. He's looking directly at the camera. And I find it quite a moving portrait of someone who's experienced battle.